Good Monday evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of Burns and Holla. I'm Zach Burns, of course, always joined by my co-host Terry Holloman, aka the Holla. It's hot as hell out. I'm sweating like crazy, and this is from just a very little amount of activity. This is me going from the first floor of my apartment up the stairs to the third floor where I actually live. So you can imagine if I was actually a runner or even a speed walker, how drenched I would be. Joining us tonight is a couple of guests I've been looking forward to talking to for a while. Former frontman. Well, I guess you're always the frontman of Minus the Bear, Jake. They just don't exist anymore. Jake Snider is with us.
Yeah.
And then digital editor.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Digital editor, Chase, that's your title at The Stranger?
Yeah, it's a sort of vague title. I can edit Facebook, I can edit a blog, I can edit a lot of things.
Just feel like you do a lot more for what's left of The Stranger than digital editor.
Yeah. I just say, it's a broad title. Editor at large, really.
Right. Well, I think we have to start. Seattle, along with Portland, is being covered extensively by national news. Most of it unfairly, with an asterisk. Chase, I want to go to you first because I know that you had a lot of firsthand experience with Chop/Chaz. What do you think about what transpired in Capitol Hill, particularly on Saturday, and what people in the media, both here and nationally, are saying about it?
Yeah, I think on Saturday we saw it sort of play out in the same way that we had seen in June. What we saw is we saw protesters that would come out, usually inspired by some sort of act of aggression, or in this case, we heard a lot of the feds were coming. And so there was a lot of tension, and the media had really, I felt like, inflamed last weekend up in a way that was a little unexpected. We've been following the protests since they started, and I wasn't really sure why last weekend was going to be bigger than any other weekend. So we were already sort of going in with this expectation that there was going to be this big brawl of some sorts between demonstrators and the police. And so whenever we have that sort of expectation, it's just inherently tense. And then Friday night, we saw a judge allow SPD to use crowd control weapons again, with a temporary restraining order that allowed them to use flashbangs and pepper spray. And so on Saturday, we saw a lot of we saw that play out. We saw SPD use flashbangs indiscriminately against a crowd that they had declared was a riot. And so we saw a protest started around 2 p.m. in Capitol Hill. It sort of migrated to the youth jail, and then it sort of came back around to Capitol Hill. And by that time, there had been windows were broken, and there was some fires that were set, specifically at the youth jail. And so once a riot was declared, we saw just mayhem like we've seen since June, and that you saw SPD just sort of throwing flashbangs into the crowd. In some cases, it seemed as if they were targeting journalists specifically. And so whenever that sort of exchange happens, we just sort of restart this whole narrative.
Right.
We're back on Monday playing a lot of the same stories that we had played a month ago. And it's interesting because I think national media really sort of plugged this into the Fed story, but there wasn't. It was SPD and protesters over the weekend. It wasn't protesters clashing off against the feds.
Right. That was more of a Portland.
Yeah.
That was more of a Portland problem. But Chase, I'm just curious because Terry, help me with the pronunciation of his last name again. He's a sports talk host on Cairo 710. Paul Gallant.
Is it Gallant or Gallant?
Paul Gallant. So he came home after visiting family or something like that, and his apartment building. There's a Starbucks at the bottom, had been destroyed. He had been told to evacuate just in case there was any sort of explosive remaining. Can we still describe these protests as being something that is moving the conversation forward in a positive way? Terry, start with you.
That's the big question, and that's honestly, I don't know because I'm not down there. I'm having to get it secondhand from media sources and get it secondhand from those who are down there in the mix. But maybe Chase, someone who's been down there, you can explain it to me better. I feel like almost the entire movement has shifted from its original purpose. I have not seen the George Floyd's protest. I haven't heard those chants. I feel like this is taken on an entire life of its own, and I'm not sure because I'm not down there. And it's been so much specifically for the Pacific Northwest to be going through this and to be the hub of everything that's going on in the country right now as far as these protests.
Yeah, well, what I've experienced is, since really CHOP started, we've seen a big mix of different organizations and people and groups that have wanted many times like conflicting things. And so I think within the past week and a half, we've seen protests really sort of die down. There's still been protests every single day, but the protests that have been remaining have been more it's been more direct action from anarchist groups. We saw Rove get broken into. We saw Starbucks and Amazon Goes, and we've seen a lot of broken windows over the past week. And so you still have that group, and I think that group is always active in our region and is being active right now. But what was interesting on Saturday is you saw that group, which I think was largely responsible for a lot of the breaking into Starbucks. We saw the same sort of targets hit again on Saturday, but you saw that group meeting up with a bunch of moms showed up on Saturday that I don't think many of them had said they'd never shown up before. So you sort of had a lot of Seattle families and moms appear because they specifically wanted to protest the feds in Portland. And then you also saw youth organizers that are specifically calling for the defunding of SPD, and you also saw those on Saturday. And so I think all three plus many of those groups were still there on Saturday, and it's difficult because obviously the media we're gonna focus on a Starbucks gets broken into, everyone has to evacuate. It is distracting, and you have council members today. I think every single one, even Shama Sawant, were calling out that type of tactic, calling out graffiti, calling out sort of name calling outside of city council members' houses. And so again, there's so many different organizations that are in the pot here. I do think that we've sort of moved more towards, it sort of feels like a May Day riot lately more than what it felt like in June.
And Chase, that's actually that is definitely what's happening, is that you have this different group of people all with different goals. And obviously most of the protests that are productive happen in the early evening, late afternoon. That's when people are actually talking about important issues as the night gets older. Although in Capitol Hill this past Saturday, things did kind of get pretty ugly early. But what the thing that's frustrating to me, I guess, about this, and I have a lot of family, I have a lot of friends on the East Coast, and whenever they're like, do you feel safe? I'm like, you shut up. Everything's we're okay. But then when I see people saying that, well, everything's okay here, that's not the case too, because Chase, you did mention there are different groups of protesters here. Some are only looking to graffiti and smash up property and whatever. And there's people in that Starbucks now that won't be able to go in for work for a while. But then there's other protesters that aren't there to do that and aren't doing anything to stop them and are kind of tacitly endorsing them. And isn't that sort of the point of these protests, is that if you're a good cop, you should also be telling and making sure these bad cops don't do anything. It's kind of like if you're a good protester, you should make sure those who are just there to fuck shit up also aren't doing that and kind of not enabling their entire or making your entire point, which is incredibly just and incredibly important, null and valid, because all the focus is going to be on is that Starbucks or that Whole Foods or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that happened like on Saturday, I was editing from home, but our reporter that was there was interesting because when the big fire happened at the trailers outside the youth jail,
right?
They had there was a stop that happened at that same time where they were offering like snacks and treats and refreshments, and so you had a bunch of people stopping to get like drinks, and medics were helping them, and then the fire sort of happened in the background. And so my experience in being at the protest is that there's so much going on that I haven't seen the person who's like lighting the thing and throwing it into the trailer. You just see the trailer on fire.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to make that demand when I think the people who are creating that sort of conflict aren't even visible. And that's been the problem for the police as well. They'll get like a explosive into the East Precinct and it'll blast a hole in the wall, and that's what they declare a riot with. And then, but they aren't going specifically to one person that they think threw that explosive device. They're going to the whole crowd. So, I mean, in defense of the people who aren't rushing to stop the people, I think it's because I don't know if they're seeing I don't know if they're seeing the people who are starting the fires. And I have seen a lot of protesters, like the sort of like mom protesters that show up that are coming for their first protest, and it's very specific in their minds, are like, we're not here to start shit. And organizers have been saying that from the beginning. I mean, I remember even on the first nights of Chaz, there were organizers on the mic being like, we're setting up a line of people around the East Precinct because we don't want people to go in and break shit. And so I guess I've heard more protesters try to stop that than people being like, yes, let's break into the precinct or let's burn down the trailers outside the youth jail.
And and Chase, that's obviously the case. I guess I'm just talking about like, because I've seen videos of people, and this is when Ike's got smashed up. Ike's being a pot shop that's been somewhat fairly accused of taking advantage of the rules that long oppressed people of color, for sure, but still no justification to attack the building. And there were people doing it, and there were other people who weren't a part of that saying pretty much, I don't see anything, I'm not going to say anything. Jake, what are your thoughts on what's transpired? Well, I mean, you and I haven't really talked in ever, so just let's the last 4 months in terms of the last 4 months in terms of CHOP. And what I'm trying to get to determine now is, because I've seen great movements turn into garbage, like with Occupy, with going back into the anti-Iraq war protests, anti-Afghanistan stuff, just turn into the worst element being able to take control the narrative. And I don't want that to happen with what's going on here, especially with an impending election coming on. So I guess the question, the base question I have for all of this is, are we doing a good job in having our voices heard in terms of bringing on other people who maybe didn't feel this way before, but now do? Are we convincing others that what we believe and what we're feeling right now is just incorrect?
I think there's some people being convinced. I think that there's a couple things that happen with a protest movement like this. There's the initial thing that starts the protest, and sometimes, almost a lot of times, with an extended protest that lasts, I don't know, it's almost been 2 months. How long has it been? 50-something days, or
it's been over quite a long time.
Over 60 days. So like things change, things kind of morph into some of the things that we're seeing in Portland and Seattle. And those two cities seem to be what is highlighted by the media currently.
Well, they're the biggest demonstration.
Yes, exactly. And, Seattle and Portland are very good at demonstrations. Like, we hold it, the community
in
seem
terms
to
of turnout, in terms of how
yeah,
many people
we turn out for it. And but it seems to have shifted away from some of the the initial importance of George Floyd's murder. And there is still that element, and I see the moms coming out in Portland, and the vets coming out in Portland, and the dads coming out in Portland, and different people beginning to get involved. But it occurs to me, where were they when this started, and why does it take so much police violence in a protest against police violence to get people to get out of their houses and come down?
Because that's a major decision to make, to go to
Sure.
go somewhere. You have. I'm not as impressed by the moms as other people are. It's I'm just I want to be. I was certainly impressed by Chris Davis for David actually for what he did when he was struck several times by an officer. The former Navy vet who was both tear gassed and beat that. That was meaningful in that he didn't react in any sort of way. But now that we have the moms, the wall of moms, you ask where they were. I don't know, but I'm not that they're all that impressed that they're here now. I guess it's a wall of moms is a great hashtag, but
and that's kind of my point in a way. It shifted into a place where they're comfortable to kind of come out, and after seeing some of the violence that the police have perpetrated since and whatnot. Yeah, I mean.
I have a few
go ahead,
challenges
Terry.
with this whole. I have a few challenges again with the whole entire protests that are taking place in the Northwest right now, and you guys have absolutely touched on it through this conversation. It's number one is the initial cause of this uneasiness, of this social unrest, was the murder of George Floyd, doubled up by the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. So that was the initial catalyst for everything that's happening right now. I feel like that message has been absolutely perverted, and it's really not at the front and center locally. I feel like nationally, when things happen, we see the Starbucks lit on fire. We see the tear gas being thrown into the crowds. We see the clashes between the police. Then it's the Black Lives Matter thing again, and the police, and so it gets a black eye. That's who is getting the national attention. It's the Black Lives Matter march in Seattle that they're assaulting police officers and burning down Starbucks, when that is absolutely not really the issue. So that's number one. And second of all, here's the question I have for everybody here. If you think about the civil rights movement of the 1960s and everything that they were able to accomplish back then, and they went through some true hardships, they faced some true battles and overcame some tremendous odds. They had leadership. They had Reverend Martin Luther King. They had Mr. John Lewis, who just passed away. They had Jesse Jackson. There were so many people, Stokely Carmichael, and Malcolm X, who were at the forefront of so many movements. Who is at the forefront of this new movement, of everything that's going on right now? Who is the face? Who is the name? Who is leading the charge? Who is in Seattle right now saying we are going to be out here until XYZ takes place? I haven't heard of anyone.
It's a great question, and it's purposeful that there's no leader. Again, I feel like I'm just harping on this point, but it's just so reminiscent of Occupy, which was purposely leaderless as well. But that's a great question. Jake and Chase, is there anybody that you feel like is the authority on this, and is that important? Does a movement need something like that?
Well, I mean, when you talk to a lot of the organizers here, they will, I had a lot of media that was outside of Seattle calling us right when Chaz started, and they were desperately seeking some spokesperson they could talk to. And
Right.
when you spoke to every single organizer, and there would be people that were there every single day, and you saw some people would show up like every 4 days, and there are some groups, like there's the Engage Seattle group that shows up, you know, most of the organizers are there every single day, but a lot of the organization around Black Lives Matter and related structures is like you said, intentionally leaderless, and it's decentralized. And so you won't find a single figure, but obviously there are figures that are coming out every single day. You know, people are obviously turning to like Nikita Oliver on some issues, but then there's also like No New Youth Jail Coalition is going to have its own set of leaders, and then people who are organizing for Defund SPD are going to have their own set of leaders, and sometimes those organizers overlap, but in a lot of instances you don't have a central figure.
You know, you just said
I just honestly,
defund.
personally, I just think that's. I mean, I kind of understand why that is in this day and age, why you don't want that. But on the flip side of that, I'm just, you know, playing devil's advocate, looking at it from
Terry. It doesn't fucking win. That's the thing. Is that
I'm trying to figure out where you win.
Yeah. Well, because Trump,
to?
let's just use Donald Trump as an example. Trump doesn't stand for any particular set of ideals. He's just an icon, and he's someone to follow, and that won, and that worked. And look at the people he brought along that had nothing in common. Mike Pence has nothing to do with Donald Trump in his entire life, other than, they both just been white Republicans. Well, I mean, who knows how long Trump's actually been a Republican, but they have nothing in common with each other politically, but Trump became the face of this. And I guess the closest thing to the face of the Black Lives Matter movement, it just is seemingly too long ago, is Colin Kaepernick. But, he was just before his time, even though that was only like 3 or 4 years ago. I guess but I kind of do agree with Terry, if this was your point. There needs to be someone that is the central figure, that is also not, I guess, a purist is not the right word, but when we look at the civil rights era and the civil rights movement, you had someone like Representative Lewis, who was willing to make concessions in order for the good, not the perfect. And I don't know that Nikita Oliver is necessarily that person. And then if there's a group that is under the guise defund the police, I don't think that they're going to make much progress either, because defund the police is probably some of the worst progressive branding that I've ever heard. I think some of us know exactly what you're talking about, but when you say something like the defund the police, it only sparks a further conversation. Or if that person isn't interested in, after hearing defund the police, then it just it makes somebody tune out.
It's like, how many with that defund the police slogan, you do have to kind of explain what you're talking about.
Well, but some people do mean defund the police 100%. There's
sure.
And that makes it even more difficult, because it's like, well, some of us don't mean defund the police. They just, and the interesting thing is that whatever other verb you would replace defund with, I think a lot of police officers would be in agreement with it, because there's a lot of calls that they don't really want to go on, and would prefer somebody else who has training in that specific arena. But now that defund the police has gotten out there first, it seems like that's what we're stuck with at this point. And I don't know if that's really a winner, because let's face it, everything's about November, right? Everything is about elections on the federal level and on and on the local level. And defund the police just became a wonderful talking point for conservatives.
Well, it's one of those things that if one of the candidates is asked about, what do you think about defunding the police? Mm-hmm. Then if they say yes, then a lot of people are going to shut off their listening muscles at that point, and not hear like kind of the message of what it actually might be that kind of is in line with that politician's belief system or their their platform. Yeah.
When you ask that question, when that question comes up in November, when someone from the media asks that question in November, that's going to be akin to pulling the pin out of a grenade and handing it to you, man, because it's going to blow up one way or another. You're going to say something about, yes, I agree with defund the police, but this, that, and the third, and it's going to shut off half of the people who are, swing voters. Or you're going to say, no, I don't want to defund the police. That's not exactly, no. And then you're going to cut off the people who were probably going to support you at that time. So again, like Zach said, it was horrible branding, horrible marketing. And let's face it, in the world we live in right now, it's all about branding. It's politics. And that's sad.
It's true. It's callous. It's a callous way to look at it, but it's true. I mean, make America great again. It means nothing. But it gets fired. And nuanced conversations, and it's another thing that I sort of miss. Nuanced conversations don't really happen that often leading up to a federal election. You just get the basket of deplorables moment, or what I see now, the defund the police moment. And if Democrats, progressives, if we blow this election against Trump, we should just become the Whigs again, or something. We need to go from whatever. We need to completely change our name, because that would be an utter embarrassment. Because Donald Trump should have zero to run on, and the only ammunition that he has now is kind of what we're feeding him. If you notice, even he doesn't even use the sleepy Joe Biden attacks anymore, because I think he realized a lot of America kind of dug the idea of a sleepy president. Like, that sounds great. Someone who's just in the office like a couple days a week. Do you ever remember hearing from a goddamn president so much? Like, I feel like when we had when Barack Obama was president, it would be like 3 weeks to be like, I haven't heard his voice, because he's had nothing to say to us, and it was wonderful. And people sort of started getting into the idea of sleepy Joe Biden, and now he's changed his course of attack on Biden. A lot of it being that if Joe Biden is elected, every night in every city in America is going to look like Seattle and Portland on some nights for a couple of hours.
Yeah, I mean,
now somehow Joe Biden's a socialist now.
Yeah, that's crazy. I know.
The Democratic Party's socialist or something.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we had a lot of warnings, because we're talking a lot about the local intersecting with the national, and that's what we were experiencing over the weekend. And you had a lot of warnings from across the board. You had warnings from Durkin, you had warnings from, protesters, from Inslee, all not to sort of quote unquote take the bait of Trump sending in, or the feds coming, and sort of it did seem downtown that there was a fight that was trying to sort of be created. You saw the giant cement wall that was around the West Precinct, and I've been covering protests at the West Precinct for a month and a half, and we'd never had that wall suddenly appeared. And the protests post-Summer Taylor have been dwindling in that area. So when suddenly you have like that wall and you have federal buildings nearby, it felt like there was that sort of provocation. And I felt like the demonstrators in Seattle didn't take that. And so you didn't see that sort of, by and large, you did see some demonstrators obviously light the youth jail trailers on fire. But that was a local issue. It wasn't us going after the feds. And so I often think, like, what are our next steps here, especially with the constant provocation from the federal level? And Seattle, we're in a very different place than Portland. Portland's had that central standoff for now, over 60 days.
Blocks. Yeah.
And I think what we saw over the weekend here is we saw a reignition of the same conflicts that we've been having, and the sort of new traumas in a way that have been created by all of this sort of in Capitol Hill, the constant police standoff that's been happening in the neighborhood. I live in Capitol Hill. You hear flashbangs. You did in June all the time. Over the weekend, all you heard were flashbangs. And I think that what we're wrestling with is, in the neighborhood, a very local problem. But then how that amplifies on a national level, I don't necessarily put it on the demonstrators to sort of solve the national branding problem, because I think that what I experience is people sort of demanding very direct actions on the local level, and then obviously that's going to be manipulated and twisted in 100 ways, especially as Trump sort of zooms in on it. But I don't think it's the demonstrators' responsibility to solve that problem of the national gaze.
It is partially their responsibility if you enter a movement to prevent that manipulation from even being possible. Maybe that's just too idealistic. Like, you go somewhere because you're upset about something, and to foist the responsibility of the actions of others might be unfair, and it probably is. But I guess there was something so pure and beautiful about the early protests, because finally, again, another conversation that took 4 years for a lot of people to have sink in, the Black Lives Matter movement became mainstream in the sense that people in Kentucky were saying it, and people in New Mexico were saying it, and that was something that was really inspiring to watch. And now, and I'm just seeing anarchistic white boys blowing up shit, and that's just really fucking maddening. Because I hate that.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of that, and there's always been a lot of that in this area. But like when I was down there in CHOP and you're talking to people, it was never, again, this one, like, I wouldn't say that everyone was like, they agreed with defund SPD. One, there was a lot of different sort of voices in that area anyways, and some people were aggressively anti-defund SPD. Mm-hmm. So the conversation is more nuanced on the ground. It's just like, obviously it's going to become, it's difficult to have the conversation because it's so chaotic. But I mean, if you talk to everyone on the ground, I don't think everyone on the ground would agree 100% with defund SPD or would agree 100% with the percentage of defund SPD. You see a really wide range of interests that are out there. But obviously defund SPD is one of the goals.
Let's talk about defund SPD. Where does everyone stand on that? Terry, start with you. What do you think? Defund SPD. What's your initial reaction to that? Because it is a very powerful statement, but it's a very nerve-wracking statement as well.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Again, I think it's all about branding. I think it's all about, and it's. I hate to keep coming back to that, but that's what it is. It's even as me as a lay person, as not someone who's running for political office. It's hard for me to answer directly because of the spotlight that I am in as a public figure. But I'll say this. I think that there are some things about the police department that needs to change, and whether that comes from repositioning funds from actual, like, the militarization of the police force into putting into more social interaction with the communities, community policing, whether we put it into maybe do it like they talked about, sending social workers out on certain calls and divvying up the duties of police officers, not putting so much on them, so that there are social workers, caregivers, alcohol counselors. Just let them do the policing. Whether that's what they mean when they say defund the police. I'm on board with some of those ideas. When you talk about getting rid of the police force and diminishing their powers to enforce legal laws that are on the books, I'm not for that. But I am for, revising some of the ways that they go about their business, doing some bias training, doing some of the things that I've talked about prior to this. But whether you call that defunding or whether you call that repositioning or restructuring, reformatting, you call it what you want.
Chase, how far should we go in terms of police budget cuts and
with the percentages?
Well, yes. Let's start with that, because 50% seems to be the general call at this point.
Yeah, I mean, because you have a range of percentages. I heard people on the ground saying 100%. A lot of people want to have complete abolition, and then it's sort of like settled in 50%. I agree. I think that the police department budget is incredibly overblown. I also just think the police should be doing far less than what they're doing. And so I agree on paper with, like, I would sign on to a 50% proposal if I was a politician, because I think that sort of agreement is a step towards creating a plan. I don't think that anyone says, when they're saying we're doing 50%, that they're saying we're going to do the exact 50% percentage. I think that it's a step towards, I agree with the community in that we need to reduce the scale of this and we need to create a new plan. And it's funny because you have like Councilmember Juarez saying, I want a plan, not a percentage. You hear that a lot. But the people who are agreeing to a percentage are also building plans. And so I think that I would agree. I think the SPD, I think police forces in general need to be defunded, and that they just need to be scaled back. I think that they need to be, I mean, the budgets are overblown. You look at the city in general, the budgets are overblown in a lot of different places, and then, underfunded in, for some people in other areas. So, especially in a coronavirus pandemic, I think that the reason we're seeing a lot of cities, not all cities obviously, but a lot of progressive cities agree to this sort of language is because we're facing this huge budgeting issue. And so if you're going to have a movement that's like, let's scale back in this area, obviously you're going to sign on to that because we're going to need to scale back anyways.
Jake?
Yeah, I mean, one thing about, I'd say you can look kind of at the budget itself and strike things and apportion funds to different areas. I think one thing that is a little, I mean, it's a $500 billion or what is it? Let me see. I pulled it up here. $400 million budget, at least.
For the city of Seattle.
And that seems pretty excessive. And a lot of that is personnel. A lot of that is overtime. And I kind of feel like, teachers don't get overtime. They don't get their time and a half for doing more work after the shift is over. And that would be a lot more effective, in my opinion, than increasing the police budget or keeping it the same, is to get the education system locally a little bit more funded in that way, or equitably funded throughout the region. I think it's hard to go like, let's take the money out of this pot and put it into this pot with like city government stuff. But I think it's totally overfunded. And I think that you can have a lot of resources that police are being used by somebody that doesn't have, a gun on their hip and isn't able to, have a feeling about something and then go in feeling threatened, or and have an outcome that's awful. So I mean, it's training. It's probably not getting rid of the entire police force, because then how do you go after like corrupt politicians and stuff like that? It's the bad guy.
Let me ask.
Let
me ask you guys this question then. So what happens if the progressive movement, the defund the police, is put into effect, and they agree to the 50% number, and 5 years down the road we find ourselves in a situation where Seattle is just overrun with crime, and we don't know what to do. How do we threw the baby out with the bathwater? How do we put the toothpaste back in the tube at that point, man? Do we go back and revisit it then and say, hey, we made a mistake and maybe we need to put some more money back into the budget? Again, playing devil's advocate here, because somebody here has to do it.
I guess it depends on the sort of crime. Seattle is by far, statistically by far the safest city that I've ever lived in. It's weird because I've lived in Kansas City, and when we're talking about what leads to an inflated police budget, it's violent crime, particularly homicides. And Seattle is it doesn't really happen here. Of course, there are homicides, but compared to Philadelphia, where I've lived, in Kansas City, and even weirdly Salt Lake City, it's an incredibly safe place. So I don't know if we would see a massive uptick in violent crime. What we would maybe see is a massive uptick in property crime. But
Zach, let's go back to this, and both of you guys can answer this. But let's go to this right now. Right now, there are conservatives in Seattle, on the outskirts of Seattle, in Eastern Washington, that will tell you Seattle is a hellhole. I refuse to go there.
Yeah.
Right now, as of today. I hear it all the time from people, and they say
Yeah,
it's because there's nobody in control. There's nobody to enforce the law.
Yeah, I have a very.
I mean, I hear it
every day for a living. I mean, it's.
I hear it from a lot of local radio hosts on various channels that I certainly don't agree with.
I hear that
No,
I live 2 blocks away from where the flashbangs are going off, and there's also little like Pomeranians going into Amazon Go. So a lot of that is just perception.
Every case, I work like 3 blocks probably from where you live, and it's. I even in the midst of like all the chaos, I would just like walk through it and find my way home. It doesn't, and never once in this city. And my wife would, who's actually. We have this whole long story of how I had to tackle somebody who was masturbating in front of her, and that happened in Seattle, without a doubt. But she walks home from work every night by herself. Like overall, we feel safe, and I don't know if it's because of our big police budget or it's just kind of the nature of the city. It's just overall a rather nonviolent city, and
I mean, Seattle has like a very low. It's low violent crime. Like we are currently at a very low, historic rate of violent crime here. But there's a lot of property crime, and so these things can be addressed with different resources. You know, we don't really need to focus as much on violent crime. Property crime are crimes of, that can. We have a city of haves and have-nots here. So
true, which is what most cities have become anyway. Let's move on. All right, Chase, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of my things is like how effective the police even are right now at stopping a lot of property crime. Like one of the things that I think has been really interesting in seeing over the last week is the police, especially with the sort of injunction and the looming ban where they weren't allowed to use crowd control tactics. Well, we saw when there was like the Rove fire and there was the Amazon Go break-in and the Whole Foods break-in, they just sort of stood there and they didn't make any arrests. Yeah. And they were going to make arrests later, which they may or may not. But so I'm often sort of like, well, if the police are already just standing there watching people break windows, we have to sort of start to have conversations about like, what do we do to stop property crime, and what people do we want trying to do that? And it just seems like it's currently not even working very well.
True, because how do you really property crime so often? Just smash and grabs. It's not like anything that's premeditated or there's chatter about on the internet. It's just an impulsive decision. I don't know how officers would be able to prevent that in the first place. I wanted to move on to the Mariners really quickly, and just sort of how my attitudes on things that I thought would provide comfort have changed. I was excited that baseball was back this weekend because it's one step closer supposedly to normalcy. But I've watched a couple of the games, and I don't know if I'm sure you all read the story today about nearly half of the Miami Marlins team has tested positive for COVID, and it's kind of like I've been out to dinner twice, I think. And I thought like, I would have such a yearning for this, and it would be so wonderful once I did it. And all it was kind of a reminder that things are so vastly different, and baseball is not providing the comfort to me that I believe that it would. It's very disturbing to watch a game with there's no fans, they're pumping in crowd noise. Yeah. It's the opposite of what I thought it would be.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about going to a restaurant. Like you want normalcy, and you go to one, and you're like, this is freaking weird. Yeah, it's like going shopping at the supermarket, and everybody's looking at each other like they're the ones that's going to infect them, and everybody's averting their eyes and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean the baseball thing is all the sports that are planning on returning is kind of going to have a little creep factor to it, like just a little creepiness, emptiness.
I agree. Like I personally was never really a big baseball fan, but I was excited for baseball to return. I think turning on the sports channels and watching reruns and watching I'm watching 1985 Super Bowl games just for my entertainment right now. So, like, hey, live baseball, live basketball is coming back. Let's watch this. And it's just so unnatural to see what's going on out there, to watch someone step up to the plate and smack a home run, and it's just silence. Like there's all, and even if they're pumping in crowd noise, it's not the same. There's the background noise of the organ, and then and then people in the background screaming and cheering or booing or just rising to their feet. It's not there. Basketball, you watch these guys go down the court, dribble through everybody and slam dunk it. It's just like, it looks like a practice or a scrimmage.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're watching a professional sport.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
funny
how
what you
long
say-
is it going to?
Oh, go on.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
I
saying.
was just
it's
like,
funny-
how long is it?
Chase, go ahead.
You do it.
Look.
Chase, go ahead.
It's Zoom. I can't see what. It's funny what you say, Terry, about rewatching things, because I'm not really a baseball fan. Funnily enough, my dad and my cousin both play it professionally, and my dad played it, but I'm not good at baseball. Don't know it. But I've been watching a lot of old like Olympics movies because I love the Olympics. I've just been sitting here watching all of these old movies, and like just it's weird because nothing can happen right now in the same way that it used to. And I think the attempts to sort of create these new fabricated environments that sort of feel like they used to, I think are across the board in sports and entertainment just sort of landing really flat. And I think we might just have a year where we talk to each other on our computers.
Yeah, we might just have to accept that there's not going to be. Well, they're going to try. The NFL, I haven't heard any of their readjusted plans. The NBA is coming back. MLB is still forging through with this season, but I'm deriving no joy from it whatsoever, which is should be the only point of sports as a fan. And I'm just not finding it, and it's really disappointing because they announced that baseball was coming back like 2 months ago, and I've been like counting down like, oh, there's going to be something new to watch, and all I see now is, oh, is that like, shouldn't the catcher be like farther away from the batter? Like, is that 6 feet? Like,
does he have a mask on?
Yeah, and it's kind of like when you watch. I don't know if you all experience this, but when you watch movies from which all movies are from the pre-COVID era, and you see people sitting crowded together at a table, like, oh my God, what are you all thinking? Why are you so close to one? None of you have masks on, and then you realize like, oh, I'm watching Ordinary People, and this is from 1983. But it's like it's just always in the back of your head, and it sort of takes away from the enjoyment of it. And I don't know.
That kind of leads me to this question. I want to ask you guys this, Jake and Chase. I know I've asked Zach this question before. Now that we are in this situation, right, where we have no fans in the stands at baseball, MLB, and NBA basketball games, where we're trying to figure out how the NFL is going to play football and keep everybody COVID safe. Socially distanced, and we're going through the grocery store staying 6 feet away from each other. Does this become our new reality? Does it become, because now we're at a point, like Zach said, where we are accepting of this social distance? It's become a part of our norm. It's not different. How do we ever go back to a situation where I don't feel crunchy standing right up on the person beside me at Albertsons?
I mean, maybe it's a good social change on some level to be more personally hygienic with other people that you're around, and you don't have to. I know a lot of people I know that are like they want to hug and stuff again. They talk about it or want to shake hands, and I'm like, I don't need that personally. That's good. It's like not that bad of a change.
Jay, you're not a hugger.
I mean, I was a big hugger, but now I'm kind of like maybe we'll see how this plays out once we get a vaccine and stuff. But yeah, I mean, we're gonna have somewhat of a change. Like there's big shifts in society after an event like 9/11, like how people go, the security theater or whatever that happened after that. And now it might be kind of a series of hygienic theater, whatever you want to call it, as things move on. Just kind of not necessarily always necessary, but I think people are going to be very cognizant of it. I mean, we're talking like, when is normalcy going to happen, or the opportunity for it? It's going to be probably quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's not going to be uniform. Like some people are gonna, like I went to Discovery Park yesterday, and there was a woman who was like telling people to stay 6 feet away from her when they would like come too close, and I was like, oh, okay. And then meanwhile, there was other people who didn't care. Some people didn't have a mask on. I went to Alki Beach on Saturday, and it was like that looked like normal life. Like no one was doing anything different. But then you go to I went to a grocery store, and there was that plastic in front of the cashier, and I was like, this wouldn't be bad if that stayed around forever. Like there will be those sorts of hygienic changes that I think are good. But it is sort of a some people have called it like a great unwinding, to use a tech term. And I think about with baseball was already worried that they weren't going to have fans really this year, and that everything was sort of, the sport is not super popular. And so some things like baseball, it'll be really interesting how they evolve in the future, because I'm betting that a lot of fans will sort of drop off this season, and we won't know with something like baseball how it'll pick up again in the future, and maybe it'll just shrink down to a size and stay to that size.
I think that definitely the behavior, the weirdest thing. I was home for like half an hour a couple of days ago before I took my mask off. Like I've just been so used to having it on, and then at some point you're like, why am I still wearing this? But I think that beyond behavior changes in terms of how we, buy groceries or visit the beach or ingest live sports, economic changes are forever. Like the way that we work, some of the jobs that have been lost are never coming back. The media landscape is never going to look the same. The live events landscape is never going to, I think, ever look the same. And
I mean, music performance like that, right? Like bands, the effect of clubs, bands.
Well, think about
everyone
how many
involved through.
Well, the clubs that'll have to close and never reopen, the bars that hosted your local live band that are being forced to close, and there's just going to be fewer venues for bands to be able to play in, because we're seeing because bands are so they're kind of like restaurants, and band venues are kind of like restaurants, and they operate only like 6 weeks out in terms of profit. Like if they don't continuously generate that profit, they close down. That's why I've seen so many restaurants close. And there's going to be fewer places for them to play. Any of these newsroom cuts that we've seen around the country, I can't imagine they'll ever be replenished. Those I think those are the lasting effects that really scare me the most, because eventually there will be a recovery from the actual disease. But in terms of the economic effects of what this disease did to us, I don't know if we do recover from that.
Hey Jake, I want to ask you though, as a musician, someone who's played in the band, doesn't this make you feel a certain kind of way? Like when we come back from all this and they start opening venues, when we move into phase, whatever it is, 2 or 3 or whatever, wouldn't it feel weird to play in a venue where you have to have people socially distanced, or where they can limit the number of people that are in there? I would assume that as a guy in a band, that a lot of your energy is generated from the response that you're getting from the crowd and the people dancing and singing or rocking out with you.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been playing music for quite some time live, and there have been hundreds of shows I've played where it has been like almost no one in the venue or half full, and it still can be a great show. I think a lot of bands and performers of any kind, comedy or music or theater, are going to be happy to have any audience to play to, but not having that rabid fan, the packed house with singing along, and you hear that from the feedback from the fans. It's going to be, I think, a long time until we get that again, until musicians get that again, and it's going to be weird for people on stage. It's just going to be an adjustment depending on what they're.
What's going to be weird for the crowd too,
in general. that'll be the communication between the crowd and the performer is going to be an adjustment itself, because everyone's going to have this strange feeling about what's going on for a while.
Right.
I mean, you were saying about like things shutting down, restaurants shutting down, all these things shutting down, venues shutting down. You're going to have bigger corporations come in and buy what's left, and it's going to be much more homogenized, much harder for other younger bands to get involved in the scenes.
Yeah, and that was inevitable anyway, though, wasn't it?
I mean, it happens. Yeah, it's been happening for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's an accelerant.
Yeah, it's going to happen a little bit faster. The College Inn pub in the University District was the last one that I saw. That it does. Institutions. It's just interesting, these institutions and these companies, restaurant and non-restaurant, that have been around for like 85 years and desperately need help from government loans in the form of PPP or loan forgiveness or whatever it is. And my hope is that we kind of rethink money and what money is here in the United States, for these companies that have been around for decades to close and go bankrupt after 3 months of struggling. I feel like we really have to rethink our entire economic system here. It's pretty tenuous as it is.
What do you suggest?
I don't know. Wampum. Go back to wampum.
Zach for president.
I'm not sure, but clearly, because my phone bill's still due every month, I can't get the same sort of forgiveness that Starbucks can demand from its landlords. Like, we're just not going to be able to pay as much this year. It just seems that capitalism is indefensible yet once again, just like it was in 2008. As it exists right now, capitalism is indefensible.
Yeah, there's no way out of
since we're talking
something like this.
Since we're talking about capitalism, and you guys tell me, because you guys seem pretty intelligent, pretty worldly. I thought about this earlier today. Of all the industrialized countries around the world, all the first world countries, how many of them are in the kind of chaos that we are in right now? Can you think? I mean, can you think of any first world country?
Currently, no.
Country?
I mean, some people in Europe are going to movie theaters.
Yeah.
Right. No, I mean, we've had a horrible, like, the leadership was terrible from the top down.
We're taking it from the racial front. We're taking it from the law enforcement front. We're taking it from the economy front. We're taking it any way you can take it. We're the afternoon special, baby. We take it any way you want to give it to us right now in America. And
pretty much.
I just don't see that. And maybe it's a testament to our system. Maybe it was flawed. Maybe, obviously, it is flawed, but we're getting it from COVID, we can't control it.
No.
What are we doing right now?
Well, most of my family lives in Canada, and most of the time, I enjoy engaging with them and telling them. I'm not an America is great person until I'm talking to someone from another country. Like, I don't know why that it antagonizes me from someone from Saskatchewan to be like, what's wrong? What kind of problems do you have down there? It's like, go to hell. Like, your football league has 8 teams. But now I'm like avoiding talking to them because I don't know how to defend us and our behavior as of late. Especially when it comes to COVID and our response to COVID. Italy was hit as hard as we were, but then they did what needed to be done. We were doing what needed to be done for a while and then decided that we just don't feel like it anymore. And here we are.
The U.S. is a bunch of states, and they should really be a bunch of different countries, right? Like Europe or something like that. It's just such incredibly different cultural values all over the place. And
wouldn't this country be so much more fun too? If because the difference between like Swiss culture and French culture is massive, but tell me the difference between Nebraska and Oklahoma. Like, there's none. If we were all our own nations, I think maybe it would be a much more interesting continent to live on.
Yeah, I was born in Florida and my whole family's there. So if that rule means I have to go back to Florida, then how we land in that.
All right, last topic.
Florida's the place where you get banished to when you've broken all the laws that we can no longer tolerate you. You go to Florida.
It's our Australia.
The
we did have
colony.
We did have like one fun thing that happened this week, at least fun for me. The NHL Seattle team announced its name. It's the Kraken. Kraken is a giant squid. It's a mythological thing for those who don't know. It wasn't my first choice for a name, but the branding is phenomenal. The two logos that I've seen is great. Their promotional video is great. How's everyone feeling about one, the name, and then two, the NHL coming to Seattle? It's kind of a fun new thing that we'll have here that might bring us some joy. So just want to shine a spotlight on that dumb shit for a second. Terry, start with you. It's a great logo.
I'm excited. Anytime we can bring another professional sports team after our sports team was stolen from us, I'm good with that. And I'm good with the NHL coming to Seattle finally. Like, how in the hell did Seattle not get a hockey team before San Jose or Las Vegas, of all places?
Or Nashville.
We are connected to Canada.
Yeah.
You feel me? And I know a lot of the young Canadian hockey players, when they're young, they come down here to play hockey, whether it be for the Thunderbirds or for
Silvertips,
Portland Winterhawks, or over in Everett. We have a strong connection to hockey here, and I think the name Kraken, let's get it cracking. Hey,
yeah.
See,
let's get it cracking.
It works on that level.
People were saying they didn't like the idea of, they said they didn't like the idea of coming to play in the crack house. Come on, come down to the crack house. Deal with the crackheads. I'm with it.
Yeah.
Jake, what do you think?
I mean, well, Kevin the beer vendor.
Kevin Zelko?
Yeah, Zelko.
Yeah.
I've known him forever, like down when he was doing shows in Kansas City, but like he hates the name. And he's a huge sports guy, obviously, but he hates the name, the Kraken. And I'm like, it was going to be something, and people were going to hate it or love it, and it is what it is. And people are taking it very hard sometimes, and people are loving it. And that's just how it goes when you name a team.
You're never going to get. It's true.
It makes me think of the giant squid that supposedly lives under the Tacoma Narrows Bridge.
Yeah.
Like our local connection. Yeah.
And no other team
giant
in the
octopus
country is called Kraken. So we have it all to ourselves. Chase, do you like it or do you hate it?
I don't have a lot of skin in the game, but I actually I was like, you know what, maybe I'll get into hockey. And I don't mind it. I think I just am excited about the merchandising, because I was like, you know what? What does the Kraken look like? I feel like the outfits can look cool. I want people to throw like squids on the ice. I don't really care. I feel like Kraken can get kind of fun. But it's sort of like to see Kraken on the Hyatt all of a sudden, I'm like, oh wow, this is gonna like it or leave it, this is gonna really impact the city.
It is.
Have you guys not seen the movie Class?
Yeah.
Remake?
Yeah. I know released the Kraken is like the big thing.
The Kraken had a giant monster.
Yeah.
It's a monster, the Kraken.
Yeah, big old beaked octopus. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a giant. Destroyed people. That's what we are.
I haven't seen the
octopuses.
I saw the one in the 80s. There was a Clash of the Titans in the 80s.
I think that's the one I saw. It was really bad.
Yeah.
I saw that too. So that's your homework.
Debatable.
Go look at the new remake, the reboot version, and watch them release the Kraken. And he's like a giant ass-kicking squid. He just kicks out everybody.
I mean, a giant squid is terrifying, so that's good. It's better than a sockeye, which is, just kind of a fish that's going to be eaten at some point.
A giant lemon. You get a giant lemon squeeze, and that's like it's kryptonite.
The sockeye is going to get eaten, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's not really intimidating for another team, is it? All right, Chase, anything you need to plug? We're going to wrap it up here.
Nope. Just read our blog, because that's all I do all day long, which is thestranger.com. And then I do that all the time, so I can't personal because everything is shut down. So I'm not doing any gigs.
And Jake, are you going to get Minus the Bear back together for some sort of Zoom performance or something? Or
No.
what? No. Okay. No.
Yeah. No. None of that. I mean, the only thing I've done is like a new thing with my friend Eric Ockery, who played drums in Christ on a Crutch and in Goodness for a while. No, wait, that was his sister. So he was in Citizens Utilities, just like, and the Tree People, great drummer. And my friend Justin Seminga and our friend Nate recorded some songs, and we might put them out. We've just been dropping teasers. It's called The Gen with 2 J's.
The Gen with 2 J's.
It's our initials. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Terry, when's your album coming out? Soon?
I want to hear that.
End of summer, my debut album, Loving My Life with COVID.
Yeah.
Oh, I like it.
I have nothing to plug except for youtube.com/Burns and Holla. Terry, I always like to get this update. Have you gotten a dime of unemployment yet?
No.
Nope, me either. Check in with that again next week. All right, Chase, thank you so much. Jake, thank you so much. Terry, I'll talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for watching Burns and Holla.
Sir.
Yeah, we'll see you next
thanks
Monday
for having me.
at 6 p.m. Thanks, buddies.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.